Hi, my name is Ann Edenfield Sweet. I'm the executive director and founder of Wings for Life International. And we have a very, very special guest with us today. And his name is Charles Rogers. He currently lives in Florida. We're going to learn a little bit about his history. And I'm not going to do any more introduction because we're going to find out about his life as we talk. So Charles, welcome. I'm so glad you are here in New Mexico with us.
Thank you, awesome. Well, like Ann said, my name is Charles Rogers. I was born in Helena, Arkansas, where my mom had 3 children by the time she was 21 years old.
Wow.
Yes, we were basically a year behind each other. We moved to Boston, Massachusetts when I was about 2 years old. In 1985-ish or so, we got there, and I remember getting to Boston and just the lights and the glamour of the city. And, it's at that point that it seems like as soon as we got there, we started to see our mom less and less. And what I would come to find out later in life is that when we moved to Boston in 1985, we were there during the epidemic of crack cocaine. And
wow.
yes, and so, my mom being young and moving to a fast city, she got engulfed into drugs because she met a man there who introduced her to it. And so as a result, eventually we wound up in the foster care system because she was homeless and she was on the streets. And there were nights where we walked all night because we didn't have anywhere to go, or the homeless shelters were closed already.
Wow.
Yeah, and so it began a whirlwind or a snowball effect of just being involved in the system from foster home to foster home. By the time I was 16, I had been to 10 different foster homes, and
10 foster homes.
10 different foster
wow.
homes, and each time we went to a different foster home, we'd stay for a little while, and then we'd be sent back home to our mom. She would have gone to treatment and tried, but then, she'd fall off again, and then we wind back up in the system. And during that process, my sisters and I, we saw a lot of violence, we saw a lot of drugs. My uncles, the 6 of them, have all been to prison. My 5 aunts have all been arrested for some form or another. And
Tell me about your father.
My father is also doing life in prison. I have never met him in person. I got a couple of letters from him over the years. He was an influence in my life only because, when I did something wrong or got in trouble, they would say, "Oh, you're bad like your father." And so they were indicating that you're going to grow up just like that. Just like my father, and in some kind of way, a child looks up to his father. So in some kind of way, I tried to mimic him too. But it was so easy to do because I already had my uncles who were, dealing drugs and in and out of jail, and my
so they
aunts.
were your role models.
Yeah, these were my role models.
Yeah, and it was drugs, it was crime, it was not go to school, play on the little league team, that kind of thing.
Right, no, at school it was, I was the bad kid, I was the troubled kid. At school, I went there and I slept or I couldn't focus on the schoolwork because I was so worried about what was going on at home. Also at school, I quote unquote rode the short bus, because I had so many behavioral issues, so many developmental issues growing up that it landed me in special education classes where, and then that subject me to, teasing and, I would say bullying, but I wasn't bullied because I was aggressive, and so if someone tried to, I kind of retaliated, or in some respects became even the bully because I was insecure about my situation. They getting called out of the classroom to go to the speech therapist and these types of things.
The slow reading group.
And all of these things, and it, at the time it affected me in a way that I didn't know. So going home, and seeing the violence, my mother's boyfriend physically abusing her and my sisters, I felt like I was the protector. And so, violence for me was easy, because I had to protect my family is what I thought. And so by the time I was 13, I quickly graduated, in crime because of the people who I was hanging around with. They were older than me, but they had also went through what I went through. And so
They had that similar childhood.
exactly. And so
Yeah.
we form a brotherhood, and I'm the young kid. They
Were
take
you a
me in.
gang? Did you
I
call
was,
yourself
I was in
a
a gang. I was in a gang early on.
Okay.
Yeah, I didn't understand what it meant. Honestly, I just knew that it was a brotherhood and we took care of each other. And when one was hungry, they fed us or they taught us how to get food. And so that's what led to my first charge, which at 13 was 4 counts of armed robbery.
At 13.
At 13, I was out hanging with the
Wow.
big boys, and we were on a crime spree that night. I mean, many nights, but on that night in particular, we ran through the city, broken cars, robbed people, snatched purses, snatched tips off of tables at the restaurants.
Wow.
Yeah, we were like a pack of wolves, honestly. And whatever came in our path, we took it. And that night I got caught and went to a juvenile detention center. And when I got there, honestly, it felt like I had been there before. It's like I knew I would wind up there. So it wasn't even, in fact, the officer gave me the phone to call my mom to come and get me. And I let the phone ring twice and I hung it up because I just would have rather stayed there and went through that process than to have called her to tell her to come and get me out of jail.
Wow.
But I didn't know the officer was on the other line, and he said, no, call back. I didn't get an answer anyway. So, but from that, it went to, more crime from 13, 14, 15, foster homes, and the cycle, it continued. And it's a story that's the same for me, but also a story that's thousands, hundreds of thousands of other
Tragically,
people's
it's a universal story,
It's a
isn't it?
universal story.
For people that are behind bars,
Yes.
I have heard this story. It doesn't matter what city, what state,
That's right.
even
What
what
country,
country,
right.
because it's that poverty, it's the drugs, it's the survival. You
That's
were
right.
trying to survive, and if survival meant getting a gun and going and stealing food, how do you at 13 know how to go get food?
Right.
Maybe it is stealing.
It is, yeah, but the moral compass is at that age is
You didn't
different.
have
I
it.
didn't have it.
You didn't have it. And you
it's-
didn't have any role models
Right.
to instill that in you. In fact, your
right.
role models were leading you
Leading
into
me
that
into
path.
it, right,
Yeah,
exactly.
teaching you probably
Exactly.
how to do it. Wow.
Exactly.
So at 17, okay, so tell us what happened at 17 then.
Okay, so by the time I was 17, I had moved to Louisiana because my mom had moved there with her boyfriend, and decided that it was better for us to stay in Boston. But I didn't want her to be there alone, so I got on a Greyhound bus when I was 16, and I went down there
Alone.
Alone,
On
yeah.
a Greyhound bus.
on a Greyhound bus.
To go to be with your mom to protect her.
Yeah, because
right?
I felt like that was my obligation. Like it was my mom, and like I watched her suffer, and I know that she wanted to be a good mom. She really wanted to, but
Yeah,
I don't
most
think she
people
knew how.
do. They want to be good.
Yeah.
They love their children.
Yeah.
There's no doubt that she loved you.
Yeah.
But she didn't know how
She
to be
didn't know
that
how.
mom.
She didn't
No.
know how. And so I went to Louisiana, and it was the same. Only I was older and bigger and stronger, and the fights were more vicious between me and her boyfriend. And finally, I had to leave because it was his house, and so I wound up, living on the street here, there, at a friend's
Not in
house.
school.
I was actually in school. I actually told the school that I was in a higher grade than I was really in. And then it caught up with me because they found out that I was actually in the 9th grade, but I was 17 years old. And so, yeah, they told me, they were like, listen, you're going to be too old when you graduate. We have a program for you, and I didn't want to, I acknowledged to some extent the importance of education because I didn't want to quit like that and just cop out for a GED. So my pride didn't let me stop. But I had also found a job, and I was working at night and going to school during the day because there was a part of me that wanted to do better because I was tired, I was exhausted. And what wound up happening is I went to school one day and I was sleeping at the desk, and the teacher came and she slammed her hand on the desk and woke me up. And she called me outside and she pointed at me and she said, "You're gonna be another statistic." And she meant well, but the delivery of anger and aggression it was wrong. It didn't work for me, and so I cursed her out and I left, and I never went back to school.
Wow.
After that. It was about a couple of days after that I committed another armed robbery, and I actually robbed the place I was working at. And
Probably not too smart.
well,
Although you knew.
I mean, it wasn't to rob anything isn't smart.
Yeah, well, that's true.
But that was definitely not smart. But I want to show you a mindset, because to show you how out of touch I was with reality. At that time, I got off of work, I ran home, I changed clothes, I went back to work, and I robbed the place that I work at, and then I left, and then I was going to go get up and go back to work in the morning, like nothing ever happened.
Wow.
They had no idea it was me.
Yeah.
The only way they knew is because my co-defendants got caught, and they implicated me, and that's how I got arrested. Well, at my arrest, I thought that because I was 17 that I would be tried as a juvenile, but in the state of Louisiana, 17 is considered an adult.
Wow.
And so they sent me to the adult jail. And again, when I got there, I mean, it was violence, it was chaos, but it was something that I had felt like I was groomed for already.
But now you had left the juvenile system, which was much less restrictive and probably had many more freedoms, and now you're thrown into
Oh
the
yeah,
real world.
it was pandemonium. It was from the time I stepped into the holding cell, it was screaming, violence, fighting, overcrowded. It was a different type of animal. And so because
And
of
what facility was this?
at the time at my first arrest, I was sent to a St. Tammany Parish prison in Louisiana.
Okay, a local.
A
So you
local
weren't
before
at-
trial.
Okay.
Right. And
okay.
then I went to trial when I was 19 years old. And I was found guilty and sentenced to 35 years without parole.
35
years, yeah.
17 years old.
17 years old, yeah.
And I think I've heard you say in the past that the judge looked at your past record, which wasn't good,
Yeah,
right?
no, it was,
And so he judged you as this perpetual criminal, probably.
Yeah.
There's no hope for this guy.
exactly.
We're gonna just lock him away and we're gonna give him all this time.
Yeah.
Wow, it's 17.
Yeah, and so when he sentenced me, I laughed at him. I laughed in his face because I wanted to prove, foolish pride, what
Yeah.
they call it, that he didn't break me. But the truth of the matter is, it had broken me, because when I went back to the cell, I cried for days until there were no more tears to cry. And then after that,
Talk about feeling hopeless, I'm
oh my
sure.
God, yeah, it was
Yeah.
a hopeless, hollow, very, very empty, desolate feeling, I remember.
And all alone, I'm sure.
And alone, yeah. There was no one could save me from that. I had to face it, and I didn't know how to face it at first. So I faced it in physical violence and rebellion against the prison authority, because I felt like that was the only control that I had over the situation.
And I've heard so many people say that too,
Yeah.
that they didn't know any other way, and they're trying to be macho, they're trying to be the man.
Yeah.
They're gonna prove it.
Prove.
You can't prove to the authorities. They have the ultimate control, don't
Yeah, they have the ultimate control, and also the other prisoners too, because
Yeah.
no matter how tough you think you are, there's someone who feels like they're tougher and they're willing to go further, and so it will be just an ongoing battle. I mean, once I had a fight with a guy 4 times in one day. He wouldn't quit and I wouldn't quit. It just got to the point where we were just too exhausted to even swing another punch.
Wow.
And so it's those types of scenarios, where it was like, okay, there must be something has to change. I knew for certain that I couldn't do a 35-year sentence in solitary confinement like I was, or rebelling against authority, or fighting, or all of those things. And so when I got to prison, Louisiana State Penitentiary in particular, there were, the average sentence is 90 years. People go there to die.
Yeah, and this is Angola, right?
This is Angola.
This is the
Louisiana State
notorious prison that at one point, it's certainly not anymore.
No,
but
no.
it used to be the most violent in America,
That's
and
right.
that's where people went to die. 90-year
right.
sentences. Can
90
you
year
imagine
sentences.
such a thing?
And
Talk about a hopeless place.
Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. But ironically, in one of the places where you would think you would see the most hope, I found so much hope. And I saw something that I didn't expect to see in prison, and that was guys getting their education and, you know, going to church and doing faith-based education programs and doing crafts and arts and, you know, these things. Granted, there was also that other element there of violence and,
Yeah, and
you
I
know.
think that started with the new warden that came in.
Burl Cain, yeah.
And were you there before he was there, or was he always there when you got there?
He was there when I got there. I was in the very early stages of the transition of the prison and what he was doing. I think I was one of the second classes in the prison because I had decided that I was going to go to the seminary and do their bachelor's degree program.
Wow.
Yeah, after.
How many years had you been incarcerated as an adult, a part of that?
I had been incarcerated at that point about 5 years.
So
6
5 years of kind of fighting the system and then finally
Yeah.
saying, you know, and seminary,
Yeah.
I know they have that incredible seminary program that now has spread to New Mexico and many
Yeah,
other states
yeah.
too.
So
But so you were in that seminary
I was,
program.
and that actually, that only became an opportunity because I got my GED. And after getting my GED, I became a tutor and started giving back and, you know, developing a sense of pride and value for myself because honestly, I didn't ever think that I was smart enough to finish high school or even get a GED, but let alone go to college. So when the opportunity was presented to me and I went and I started to excel and succeed in it, it just continued to, you know, build confidence and give me a greater sense of value in myself that made me want to kind of like be that same mentor to people that those guys were to me who fought with me who told me, hey man, you're being hard-headed. There's something that I identify with in prison. I didn't have a father, I didn't have a brother. My uncles were who they were. But in prison, I saw fathers, I saw grandfathers, there are people in prison who did one, you know, bad thing.
I know.
And before that, they were airline pilots or they were business owners.
My
or
husband.
Your husband, right. They were, you know, model citizens in society who one incident changed their lives.
Yeah.
So I was able to be around those types of people and kind of get
So you sought them out though, and
yeah.
you made some choices in prison that anybody behind bars can make, but it's a personal choice. You made that choice to make a change in your life, right?
Absolutely, and it's a personal choice that, you know, you have to make, but you have to be tired of, you know, being that other person. And for me personally, I was exhausted, and I remember making a vow saying, I don't know how, but I want to be the opposite of everything bad I ever did. And along that path is where I started seeking out, you know, certain types of individuals, holding the professors up after class, going to the doctor and getting checkups and talking to the doctor and spending extra time with the doctor I was like a sponge trying to absorb anything. You couldn't tell if it was about the streets or crime. I didn't want to hear that because in my mind I had seen.
You were already an expert in that.
Yeah, I was done with. I was
Yeah.
so done with that, and I just wanted something different.
So you started really reaching out to the people, and they are there in the prisons, and all the volunteers that
Yeah,
come
the
in, and all the
volunteers,
programs.
yes.
And I've heard it say, you go Christian
Right.
to get out of gang life and things like that in the prison. But I have heard that, and I have seen that. And so for you, that was that personal choice that you made that then got you in a totally different direction. Now tell us about this hospice program that you finally got involved in.
Okay, so
At Angola.
So when I finished the seminary, I was like, okay, what's next? Now I have this bachelor's degree in Christian ministry and counseling, and how am I going to use it? Like, there were opportunities. They were like, oh, you can be a minister. You could even start your own church in prison and then go, like,
I know,
and
I know.
yeah, so, but I didn't feel that that was my calling. So then hospice was an opportunity for me. So I signed up for it. And it took about a year for them to get back to me. And when they did, I went there and I did orientation and they interviewed me. And um, ironically, when I got there, there was a camera crew there, and I wasn't expecting that. And they had like a panel set up, and I read the flyer, and it said, you know, sign this release form. This is from the Oprah Winfrey Network. We're gonna
So Oprah was in prison.
yeah, well, yeah, she sent
Yeah.
her people. Forrest Whitaker, the famous actor, you know,
Yeah.
he was the narrator. So I went and I became a part of, you know, something that honestly I didn't intend for. I intended to do the hospice work. I wasn't looking for the cameras. I wasn't looking for the recognition. I just was going to do something
That you felt called
that I
to do.
felt called to do. I didn't fully understand the magnitude of what hospice was. I knew that I would have to change the diapers of dying men. I knew that I would have to bathe them and feed them and all, but I felt like I had a heart for it. And I learned a lot about myself in the process.
Oh, I bet you did.
Oh, yeah.
And plus, you had to be dealing with medications and in prison. I
Oh,
mean,
yeah. Well-
drugs are
Well,
yeah.
and that's-
So talk about that a little
Yeah,
bit.
let's talk about that. Well, so you know that these guys have stage 4 cancer
Right.
and the worst of the worst illnesses that you could have. And so they did have morphine patches, 60 milligrams, even more. And they were getting morphine pills. And so to be a prisoner in that situation and for them to trust you with a patient alone, knowing that he has a patch on his arm that someone could peel off. I'm allergic to morphine, by the way, so I, you know, but not that I would have, but you know,
But yes, it's very tempting.
That is there.
Yes, it's right there.
Yeah, it's right
Yeah.
there, and it's
So they really trusted
they
you.
really had to trust you, and
Yeah.
it's not like there were cameras in the room or any of that. And so the level of trust, even in this moment, was unbelievable.
Yeah.
Because they trusted, you know, an armed robber or the other guys who were murderers in the room with a dying man in a closed door, and it's just you and him,
Yeah.
you know.
So, wow. So how did that feel, giving back to somebody? My husband does hospice, and to be there for their last hours. How has that changed your life?
God, well, in so many ways, it definitely gave me a greater value and sense of time and life and purpose, you know, because the question is, I remember through the hospice orientation they asked this question, what do you want to be written on your tombstone?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
how will people remember you? And going through orientation, it had somewhat of an impact, but when I saw the first man take his last breath, my entire perspective on life itself and time changed. You know, and until this day, like, I have a pet peeve for time. I want to be punctual. I want to be making the most of my time. I don't want to waste my time. I want to do things that matter, that bring value. And, you know, it's tough too, because you got to have a balance between having freedoms and enjoying life, and it not just be, you know, like, oh, don't
A
waste
race
time.
from here to here to
Yeah,
there.
yeah. And so for
Yeah.
me, it has definitely had, you know, more of a positive impact on me for that reason, in terms of just, one, knowing that there is a deeper humanity and that lives inside of me, and a compassion for people. Because like I've told people, when it's 1 o'clock in the morning and it's just me and that man in that room and he's in a coma and his diaper needs to be changed, only I know, and God knows that that needs to happen. And there's been, you know, it's up to me to do that. And there's been times when I was tired. I worked all day, and I still had to
You
go.
didn't wanna do
and I
that
did
diaper.
not want to. I did not want to change
Yeah,
the diaper,
but
and
just
so
that
you have
caring.
to reach inside
Yep.
and say, you know, give me the strength. That was my, you know, words to myself. It's like, give me the strength to do this right
Yeah.
now, because I don't feel like doing it.
Now, let's talk about time. You talked about time. So, okay, you had 35 years.
Yeah.
Okay, so tell us how come you're out here talking to me in Albuquerque, New Mexico,
Right.
instead of still
being
being
in
behind
prison.
bars,
So,
yeah.
so as fate would have it, as destiny
God
would
works in our
unfold,
lives.
as God would have
Yeah.
it, or however
However
people like
want
to
define that, yeah.
define it. That documentary introduced me to some people who, put their reputation and their fortune and their, livelihood on the line to stand up and say that guy deserves another chance, and they did.
So they looked at you as a 17-year-old,
Mm-hmm.
started looking at the history. Why were you in 10 foster homes? Why
Right.
did you keep getting arrested?
Right.
Why were you caught stabbing your boyfriend, your mother's boyfriend?
Right.
Well, when you start looking at that pattern, they saw this beautiful person that you had grown into
Right.
and saw this poor troubled youth and saw there is hope here for this individual.
Right.
And that's the whole beauty of your story, is that there's so many people that have had this horrible life growing up, but it hasn't defined you, and it's not, and so at the end of your life, your last breath, you're going to have some different
That's
things to
right.
share with people, aren't you?
That's right. That's absolutely right. And so with hospice, it definitely has me thinking of life in terms of legacy now.
Yeah.
You know.
So, okay, so what happened? So now,
So
people looked at your story,
Mhm.
and then what happened?
I got a letter from a lady in Miami, Florida, who said, she said, I can't help you, but I have a friend who can. And she made the connection, and I called him on the phone, and he told me, he said, consider me your guardian angel. And I laughed it off, I was like, I didn't laugh at him, but I was like, okay, yeah,
Yeah,
great.
sure, right.
Yeah, but I'm like,
Yeah.
yeah, you have no idea
Yeah.
how many,
I got 35
I
years
got
here,
35
yeah.
years, and every appeal I've ever filed has been denied. And I met him in 2013, and for 5 years we fought with the court system, and we did appeals and hired lawyers and more lawyers. We hired lobbyists, like everything we could do. We went to the governor of Louisiana.
Wow.
Yeah, and
I bet at one point, the governor of Louisiana, he spoke at something that I was doing for a
really?
prisoner family conference. Very caring individual.
Yes.
And it was probably that governor, because
Yes, yes.
he had a real heart
Absolutely.
for people behind bars that had been so many years
Oh,
and
yeah.
so many, yeah.
It definitely
Yeah.
changed the culture from when I came in until the point where finally the judge that sentenced me actually retired, and his son took his place. And
So his son became the
his
judge.
son became
Oh my
my
goodness,
judge.
yeah, what a story.
Same name, everything. And he looked at my case one time, and he said, you deserve another chance. And so he called me back in, and they looked over the case, and they said, you were a juvenile at the time. There were some new case laws that came out that were shining light on juveniles who were sentenced to life without parole or numbers equivalent to it. We were able to slip through that crack and present it, and he granted it. And after 17 years, he gave me credit for time served and released me without any parole or
Oh, how
probation or
beautiful.
anything. Yeah.
So it's such a story of redemption, of grace, of forgiveness, of transformation, because you transformed your life.
Yeah.
And I have personally seen that in so many people. And I think that's the beauty of you being out and being able to share today. So what advice do you have for, first of all, for young kids that are really struggling at home, and they're doing all the things that you were doing? We were just in the juvenile facility here, and I know what you shared with them. So, but give our audience an idea of some of the things that you would advise for the young people that are just starting to get in trouble, young people behind bars, and for the adults that are behind bars, that we just have millions, 2.7 million, whatever the world, the magic number is today.
Right.
It's way too many. What advice do you have?
The very first thing that I would say is that we have to have hope, and we have to find hope. And by find hope, I mean that sometimes what's before you is hopeless. But what you can see, if you can see it in your mind, If you can see it, then you have something to hope for. But if you can't see it in your mind's eye, then you're going to be hopeless. So find hope. Look for things that you feel matter to you, that bring value.
So for us that are on the other side, we have to provide that glimpse of hope, that opportunity that you
That's
can get that education. Take advantage of it while you're behind bars,
That's right.
right?
That's absolutely
Because you
right.
did that. Without that, I think reading, doesn't it
Oh
just,
my God.
your mind, you suddenly grew, you could transform, you went around the world through the books you read and the things that you
Absolutely.
learned.
And so I would most certainly say to seek education, seek knowledge, because knowledge truly is power, and it opened my mind to a world that I didn't know existed. So if you are incarcerated and you have nothing but time on your hands, then most certainly use that time wisely and put something in your brain. They say that what we put in, that's what comes out.
That's exactly
And
right.
that's exactly true. And
Yep.
I know that is true. It's proven true in my own life. And I've seen it proven true in other guys' lives who have been through similar situations to me or even worse. It's what you put into yourself, the people you surround yourself with, the communities that you surround yourself with. That is what is going to be cultivated, and that's what's going to grow. And so I would definitely say, but you must first be able to see it,
Wow.
first.
Well, I'll tell you what, folks, isn't this incredible? We could be talking for hours and hours and hours, and I'm
sure.
thankful for the hours I've been able to spend with them. But I hope today you've heard this story, this universal story of a young boy, no adults in his life, no father, protecting mom, sisters, survival, you gotta
Yeah.
eat. And we can make change. We could give them that hope at that early age. But if you're behind bars, my gosh, there is hope. And this program is all about hope. We're trying to educate and help and encourage. And so I just am so grateful for you being here with us today.
That's been my pleasure.
And I always close with a story, so I'm going to close with a story. And this is a wonderful story. It's a true story. It is a story about crime and hope. So hey, here we go. It's a little longer than normal, but it's so wonderful. I want to share it. And this is true. The story is titled Easy Eddie and Butch O'Hare. Al Capone was notorious for enmeshing the Windy City, Chicago, in everything from bootleg booze and prostitution to murder. Sound familiar? Capone had a lawyer. He was nicknamed Easy Eddie. He and his lawyer had a very good relationship, and Eddie was a very good attorney. In fact, Eddie's skill at legal maneuvering kept Big Al out of jail for a very long time. To show his appreciation, Capone paid him very well, not only with big money, but also special dividends. For instance, he and his family occupied a fenced-in mansion with live-in help and all of the conveniences of the day. The estate was so large that it filled up an entire Chicago city block. Eddie lived the high life of the Chicago mob and gave very little consideration to the atrocities that went on around him. Eddie did have one soft spot, however, and he had a son who he loved dearly. Eddie saw to it that his young son had the best of everything: cars, clothes, and a good education. Nothing was withheld. Price was no object. And despite his involvement with organized crime, Eddie even tried to teach his son right from wrong. Eddie wanted his son to be a better man than he was. Yet, with all his wealth and influence, there are two things that he could never give his son. He couldn't pass on a good name, and he sure couldn't give him a good example. Well, one day, Easy Eddie, reached a very difficult decision. Easy Eddie wanted to rectify all the wrongs that he had done. And he decided that he was going to go to the authorities and tell the truth about Al Scarface Capone. He wanted to clean up his tarnished name and offer his son some semblance of integrity. To do this, he was going to have to testify against Capone and the mob. And he knew that the cost would be great. But he still went and he testified. Within a year, Easy Eddie's life ended in a blaze of gunfire on a lonely Chicago street. But in his eyes, he had given his son the greatest gift he had to offer, at the greatest price that he could ever pay. And police removed from his pockets a rosary, a crucifix, a religious medallion, and a poem clipped from a magazine. And this is what the poem said. The clock of life is wound but once, and no man has the power to just tell when the hands will stop at late or early hour. Now is the time that you own. Live, love, toil with a will. Place no faith in time, for the clock may soon be still. Now let me read the second story. Remember, we had the name O'Hare in there. Okay, so World War II had produced many heroes. One such man was Lieutenant Commander Butch O'Hare. He was a fighter pilot assigned to the aircraft carrier Lexington in the South Pacific. One day, his entire squadron was sent out on a mission. After he was airborne, he realized that his fuel tank was empty and somebody had forgotten to top off the fuel tank. And he was not going to have enough fuel to do the mission. So he had to return back to the carrier. So reluctantly, he dropped out of formation, headed back to the fleet, and as he was returning to the mother ship, he saw something that turned his blood cold. A squadron of Japanese aircraft were speeding their way towards the American fleet. Well, the American fighters were on a sortie, and the fleet was all but defenseless. He couldn't reach his squadron and bring them back in time to save the fleet, nor could he warn the fleet of the approaching danger. There was only one thing that he could do. He must divert them from the fleet. So laying aside all thoughts of personal safety, he dove into the formation of Japanese planes. The fighting was notorious. It was terrible. It attacked one surprise enemy after another. Butch wove in and out of the now broken formation and fired at as many planes as possible until all his ammunition was gone. Undaunted, he still continued the assault. He dove at the planes, trying to clip a wing or a tail in hope of damaging the flights. Finally, the exasperated Japanese squadron took off in another direction. Deeply relieved, Butch O'Hare and his tattered fighter limped back to the carrier. Upon arrival, he reported and related the events surrounding his return. The film from the gun camera mounted to his plane told the truth of his tale. It showed the extent of Butch's daring attempt to protect his fleet. In fact, he had destroyed 5 enemy aircraft. This took place on February 20th, 1942, and for that action, Butch became the Navy's first ace of World War II and the first naval aviator to win the Congressional Medal of Honor. A year later, Butch tragically was killed in aerial combat at the age of 29. His hometown would not allow the memory of this World War II hero to fade. And so today, if you walk through O'Hare Airport, and I've done it many times and seen it many times, we see his statue and a tribute to this great man. So the next time you're at O'Hare, give some time to visiting Butch's memorial, displaying his statue and the Medal of Honor. It's located between Terminal 1 and Terminal 2. So what in the world do these two stories have in common? Butch O'Hare was Easy Eddie's son. Wow
Yeah.
is right.
Redemption.
Redemption,
Yeah.
hope, giving back, doing the one thing that he could do for his son. And I was looking for a story, and I thought this was just going to be a perfect story for you,
Yeah.
because you have turned your life into a gift to everybody that meets you.
Yeah.
You can take your life story and share it to any place in this world, because there are so many that identify with it, and yet you are hope, your transformation, you are new life, and that's what you've done with your life. So thanks, folks. I hope this has been encouraging for you. It's certainly, boy, you've really touched my heart, and I'm just so honored to know you. And I thank Charles for being with us today, and I hope that his story will touch some part of your life story, perhaps, or how can you be that glimmer of hope and that shining light for somebody else. And if you don't know how to do it, come and call me, because we'll get you into prison and we'll try to help give that hope to everybody that we meet. So thanks for being with us, and hope you'll join us again next week, same place, same time. Thanks, everybody. Good night.